A very good morning to all of you. So in yesterday's class, we took up PYQs on the thinkers part, and we did discuss the 3 years PYQs in the last 3 years, and you see that on almost on an average in paper 1, 50 marks question comes from the administrative thinkers part. Okay, so that is the reason why we have given it so much importance. So today we are going to start with the next two important topics in paper 1, which is comparative public administration and development dynamics. Okay, they are two related topics. The topic comparative public administration and the topic development dynamics, these two are related topics. Okay, we will be starting with CPA, comparative public administration. Comparative public administration, that is CPA, comparative public administration. This is the topic that we would be discussing. We will be starting with this discussion today. Now, to understand this, that is comparative public administration, we need to go into the background of what was happening when this very subfield was developing in public administration. So let's begin our discussion with an understanding of the background of this particular topic. So if we talk about public administration as a discipline per se, we can say undoubtedly that public administration as a discipline emerged in, it emerged in the US. No, it emerged in the US. Okay. So if you look at the pre-1950s, so in this very era, whatever development was going on in the discipline of public administration, it was primarily the developments in US. The developments in USA. That means whatever was going on in USA, that was what public administration was. Okay, that was what public administration was, and that is the reason I did say that everything that was going on in the discipline of public administration was basically it was basically whatever was going on in the US. However, if we come to the post, or you can say the 1950s onwards. Now, if I ask you globally, use your knowledge of your understanding of the world affairs and tell me what happens in what are the most important events that have taken place in the 1940s and the 1950s. What were the most important events that have happened? Can you tell me? The 1940s, the 1950s. What were the most important events that are that were going on during this very period? It's a new topic, Ayushi. It's a new topic. Comparative public administration is a new topic. We will combine together two topics. The topic comparative public administration and development dynamics. Okay. So these two topics will combine together and we will discuss it. These are very, very important topics. Okay. Very important topics. World War. Yes. This was the time when World War, you can say the Second World War, it was over. It was over. And because of this, yes, we can say that there was decolonization that happened. Decolonization. Decolonization happened. That means as soon as, as soon as the World War was over, now the European countries which had colonized most of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, so these countries started withdrawing. Now, these countries did what? These countries started withdrawing. Now, what was another important development which had happened was the emergence of US and USSR as superpowers that means along with a bipolar world along with a bipolar world, what had happened as a result of it was that this bipolar world also gave rise to Cold War. This also gave rise to Cold War. So now what we see is that the America, the United States of America and Russia or USSR, now they are they were the two superpowers that had emerged post the Second World War. And this resulted into what? This resulted into a competition between the two. And this competition is what we call as the World War. So there was also the this was also the Cold War, and this Cold War also had started coming up. Okay. So what are the things that we have to understand here? What we have to understand is that one important factor that was in the background of the 1940s, 50s, that is this particular time, was the factor of decolonization. Why? Because the European countries were withdrawing. The European countries were withdrawing. The European countries were withdrawing. Okay. Now look at another factor, which is what? Which is the emergence of US and USSR. And US and USSR were in a competitive environment against each other. Okay. So they were competing with each other. So there was, along with that, there was also the Cold War and the competition between the two superpowers, that is US and USSR. Okay. Now, the very concept of comparative public administration emerged in this very background, because when we talk about those countries which were now being decolonized, that means they were no more the colony of the British, or for that matter, other European countries. Now, what would they want? What would they want? What would be their ambitions? What would be their ambitions? Can you tell me? What would be a country, what a country would want once they have been decolonized? Now, what would they want? Can you tell me? Anyone? Look at, India and try and what did we want after we gained our independence? What did we want? Yes. After our independence, what did we actually want? Tell me. What did we want post independence? Growth, economic growth and development. Okay. So our ambitions was economic growth and development. It was obviously economic growth and development, which means this was it, it was not just, no, it was not just our ambition. It was the ambition of all those countries who had, no, who had become independent during these 2 3 decades, 40s, 50s, 60s, because most of the African countries, Asian countries, as well as Latin American countries, they became independent during this particular phase. So one most important subfield, no, subfield that developed in public administration was the subfield of development administration. Okay, because of this, so there was what? There was a growth in the sub discipline or subfield within public administration called development administration. Called development administration. So development administration grew in this very background. Development administration grew in this very background because if you just look at public administration till the 1950s, so whether it is Wilson's call for dichotomy, whether it is principles, and whether it is any other aspect, it does not have that growth idea, the economic development concept. No, the focus is always on efficiency. The focus is how to enhance efficiency in the organization. So this growth and development, this concept became one very important subfield. It emerged as a subfield in public administration, and it emerged in a very specific background. The background of what? The background of the countries gaining in newly independent countries. Okay. Now, second, the idea that we have discussed was what? Second idea that we have discussed was about two superpowers, US and USSR, US and USSR competing with each other. With they are doing what? They are competing with each other. Okay. US and USSR, now they are competing with each other, and now this also had a very important, contribution or impact on the discipline of public administration, because this competition did what? This competition again brought up a new dimension to the subfield of, to public administration, which is the dimension of comparative public administration, that is CPA. Now why CPA? Because of this. So now what you have to understand is that what happened here. देखो, ये जो कोल्ड वॉर था ना, ठीक है, हियर मी आउट एंड बी वेरी केयरफुल इन अंडरस्टैंडिंग द वेरी बैकग्राउंड. ठीक है, I will be providing you notes for comparative public administration and development dynamics. Okay, it will be uploaded maybe by today itself. By the end of the day, it will be uploaded. Both development administration and comparative public administration, I will be providing you with the notes. But in that very notes, the background is not something which has been mentioned. So the most important understanding that you have to have here is the very background. Okay, it is the very background. So let's be very careful in understanding the whole concept. Okay. Now see, how did this Cold War function? What was going on? What were the things that were going on? It is something which needs to be properly understood. So what had happened was that now these two superpowers are competing with themselves. And we know that when we talk about Cold War, so what was this Cold War about? Can you tell me? What was this Cold War about? What kind of war was Cold War? Yes. Can anyone tell me? What kind of war was Cold War? What kind of war? I hope you must have studied. No, you must have definitely studied this. What kind of war was Cold War? Capitalism versus socialism. Okay. Okay. Anyone who wants to add something to this? It was an indirect conflict. Okay. Anyone who wants to still add something? What kind of war was Cold War? And it was a political rivalry. Okay. Okay. Political rivalry. Okay. More importantly, you can say Cold War was an ideological war. It was what? It was an ideological war. Cold War was what? Cold War was an ideological war. It was not the hot war like we see. That means it was not an armed conflict. It was not an armed conflict. It was what? It was about, it was about ideology. That means there was a struggle as to which ideology is better. Is it the ideology of capitalism or the very concept of democracy which is associated with capitalism? So on one hand, you had the ideology of capitalism, democracy, liberalism. On the other hand, you had an ideology of what? You had an ideology of you had an ideology of socialism or communism. That was the other ideology. Clear? So there were primarily, when we say it was an ideological war, there was the ideology of what? The ideology of democracy, capitalism, liberalism, versus communism, socialism, or state domination. These were the two ideologies which were competing with each other. They were what? They were competing with each other. Clear? So this is what you have to understand, that when it was a ideological war, if it is an ideological war, how is an ideological war won? ठीक है, एक आइडियोलॉजिकल वॉर कैसे जीता जा सकता है? An ideological war can be won when one ideology is being preferred by most of those neutral countries that are there in comparison to the other ideology. That means if we prefer democracy, capitalism, or liberalism, this kind of an ideology, if a country starts, no, the number of countries start joining this ideology, it's the US or the concept of liberalism and capitalism which has won. Or if there were countries like communism, no, if the countries started adopting communism, socialism, state domination, and all of this, that means USSR has won. है ना? So now this was the time when what you have to understand is that because of the ideological war, now US as a country started doing what? It started studying even other countries and the administration that was there in other countries in order to suggest what? In order to suggest reforms so that these countries could achieve development. So in the context of Cold War and US, because US can be considered as what? US can be considered as a womb in which public administration was developing. समझ रहे हो ना मैं क्या कह रहा हूं? मैं कह रहा हूं यूएस एक वूम है जहां पर पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन डेवलप कर रहा है, यानी यूएस एक गर्व है जहां पर ना जैसे मदर्स होती हैं, दे डू व्हाट दे the fetus develops in the mother's body. Similarly, US's intellectual landscape, यूएस का जो इंटेलेक्चुअल लैंडस्केप है वहां पर पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एज अ डिसिप्लिन बढ़ रहा है, ग्रो कर रहा है ना, पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एज अ डिसिप्लिन ग्रो कर रहा है. क्लियर? दैट इज व्हाट वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड. That is what we have to understand. So what has now happened is that US has started focusing on comparative studies. It started funding institutions involved in such studies. ठीक है? और इसमें ऐड करो द न्यूली इंडिपेंडेंट कंट्रीज. Now, what are newly independent countries at this particular time? What is their demand? What do they want? So newly independent countries that are there, they are looking for development. They are doing what? They are looking for development. वो development तलाश कर रहे. They are living, no, they want that. So what they want is that they want to also see how other countries have achieved development. So they want to take up comparative studies in order to understand what development mechanisms are likely to work. What development mechanisms are likely to work? है ना? हम भी यही तो ढूंढ रहे थे ना. This is what we were also at that time. We also wanted this. So India, because of colonization, India had a lot of socio-economic problems and India was trying to resolve them. And like that, there were other newly independent countries who were looking to resolve what their development needs are. So they were looking for developmental models that which developmental model was more suited to us? Which developmental model could be best adopted for us, and how can that be done? How could we know this? So we could know this could also be done by what? This can also be done by taking up comparative public administration. So when we take up a comparison and comparative analysis between two administration of two different countries, then we could understand what the administration of one country is doing correct and how we know that can be adopted. Clear? So this was the background. This was the background. Two important things. First, it was the background of the World War. The World War was over. There were decolonization. The efforts of decolonization is what was going on. This effort of decolonization was when European countries were withdrawing, and this resulted into those countries which were newly independent countries. They wanted development. They wanted to achieve economic growth and development. Okay, so this their demand of development resulted into the growth of this very idea of what? This very idea of development administration. Clear? That is what started growing. Then comes what? Then comes the Cold War. That is the consequence. That is what we see is that there is also an ideological war that is going on. So how can this ideological war be won? If one ideology prevails over the other. That means if more countries start adopting one ideology over the other, that is when we can say ideological war has been won by one country. That is what can happen. So for that, what we see is that now countries are started looking at they start looking at comparative public administration, because that is one way to win a country ideologically over. So if there is a country which was to provide India solutions to the problems that we were facing, like just think of what had happened during that particular time. So we started facing the problem, number of socio-economic problems were there, and during the initial phases, India opted for a socialist kind of a political structure, economic structure to be more specific, not political, but an economic structure was what? It was more of a socialist structure. Why? Because that was more suitable for us. The state, if they had control over resources, it could be better used. This was something which was visualized कि उसे बेहतर यूज किया जा सकता है ना? India faced problems related to the neighborhood that was there. So India wanted defense capabilities, है ना? Defense capabilities चाहिए थी, and USSR stepped in, helped us. So you would find that initially, the first approximately 40 to 50 years that was there, this 40 to 50 years, India had this leaning towards Russia or USSR. Why? Because it was the country which was providing solution to the problems that India was facing. That is what they also wanted to achieve. है ना? So US started doing what? They started funding institutions, taking up comparative studies so that they can understand the administrative problems of different countries and provide them solutions. With this solution, they are likely to ideologically win those countries over. So US, in order to win this Cold War, adopted a intellectual mechanism as well, that how intellectually, by providing administrative solutions and all of this, how we can win over countries in the Cold War period. They wanted to do that as well. And along with this, newly independent countries, in their quest of development, वो development achieve करना चाहते हैं. So in their quest of development, what they also wanted to know about is what other countries are doing. So if India faces a problem related to, suppose going back to the 1950s and the 1960s, India was facing a problem related to food grain sufficiency. So India was not self-sufficient in food grains. So at that particular time, India would look at the world and India would study the administrative instruments or mechanism of different countries which were self-sufficient, and we would try and understand that okay, what works, है ना, कहीं अगर ये काम कर रहा है तो क्या ये इंडिया में अडॉप्ट किया जा सकता है, क्या ये हमारे यहां काम हो सकता है, इसका इस बात को हम जरूर पढ़ेंगे. एंड दैट डिमांड्स व्हाट, दैट डिमांड्स कंपैरेटिव स्टडीज, कि आप कंपेयर करो अपने एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव स्ट्रक्चर्स को, अपने एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव आइडियाज को कंपेयर करो टू दैट ऑफ अदर्स. एंड दिस इज द रीजन, दिस इज द बैकग्राउंड in which post the 1950s there was suddenly an intellectual stimulus which was given to whom? It was given to the very idea of CPA, comparative public administration. So was CPA for the very first time talked about in the 1950s? क्या लगता है आपको? Was it talked about in the 1950s? कि क्या उससे पहले भी इसकी बात हुई है? Yes, who will tell me? Can we say that CPA was for the very first time, CPA was discussed only in the 1950s, not before that? Wilson talked about it. Yes, you are absolutely correct, Pragya. You are absolutely correct. CPA, if you go back to the essay 1887, and in 1887 Woodrow Wilson, if you remember, he is the father of public administration. So Woodrow Wilson, in his same essay, Woodrow Wilson did what? Woodrow Wilson did talk about the very concept, the very idea of what? Comparative studies. Woodrow Wilson talked about the very idea of comparative studies before 1887. No, it was this time. That means you can see why was it that Wilson's idea of comparative study was not given much importance during 1880s, but suddenly it became very important post the 1950s. Why? Because of the new developments, that was there. This is why it became important during this very period also. Yes, now before I move forward, is this whole idea very clear? Is this whole idea very clear? Yes or no? Anyone who has any problems in what we have discussed in the last 2 slides? Yes, I want every one of you to answer so that I can now move on. Anyone who feels there is anything which I need to explain again, anything which you have not understood? Anything which you have not understood? Anyone? You have 30 seconds. See, summarizing it primarily in 2 things you have to understand, Deepti. The background of comparative studies revolves around 2 important incidents. First, the incident of decolonization. Because during the time period of colonization, a country was economically being exploited. Because a country was being economically exploited, post post colonization, the most important factor that influenced them was the factor of development, and therefore emergence of the idea of development administration. Clear? Within development administration, another concept which no evolves is the very idea of comparative public administration, and it is influenced because of first the Cold War aspect, because every all these two countries, superpowers, US and USSR, they want to influence others. So they started using comparative studies so that they could do what? They could influence others, so that they could provide them solution to different problems, etc., etc. Clear? And then the another reason for development of CPA is that because the newly independent countries were looking forward for a developmental model, so they started studying different countries and the administrative structures, the functioning of administration, so that they can adopt a model of their own. वो ये चाहते थे कि वो अपने लिए एक मॉडल अडॉप्ट कर सके. क्लियर? दिस इज व्हाट इट वाज. Okay, let's move on. Now, comparative public administration. So what is comparative? We have understood the background of it. Now, let's try and understand what exactly is comparative public administration. So comparative public administration is what? Comparative public administration is a subfield. It is a subfield within the domain of public administration, or you can say within the domain of development administration. Development administration. Okay, within the subfield of development administration. Okay, and what does comparative public administration talk about? As the name itself suggests, comparative public administration is about making comparative analysis. It is about doing what? It is about making comparative analysis. It is about making comparative analysis. Comparative analysis between whom? So comparative analysis between administration of two countries, two or more countries, two or more countries. It is about what? It's about making a comparative analysis. Comparative analysis of two or more countries. Okay. Now, what is the objective of this comparison? The objective of this comparison is, what? There are three things that has to be understood here. What are those? By making this comparative analysis, an administrative structure understands what is to be adopted. What is to be adopted? That means if there is a country which is trying to do what? If there is a country which is trying to, suppose, solve a problem, so it studies administrative structures of different countries who have already solved those problems, or who are doing good, or are on the verge of solving these problems. है ना? They are doing what? They are on the verge of solving these problems. Clear? So they are about what? They are trying to see what is to be adopted. Clear? Secondly, it is also about understanding what can be adopted. What can be adopted. And thirdly, it is also about understanding what is to be rejected. What is to be what? What is to be rejected? Clear? So three things. What is to be adopted, what can be adopted, and what is to be rejected. Let's try and understand these three important questions. मैं फिर से रिपीट कर रहा हूं और इस बार एग्जाम्पल्स रिपीट कर रहा हूं. देखो, if we try and just take an example of India, and India as a country, we are moving forward, we are pacing forward in order to achieve economic development, है ना? India, by what recently has been observed by India's by international institutions is that India is on its way to becoming the fourth largest economy of the world, as we are going to overtake Japan. In this year itself, we are going to become the fourth largest economy of the world because we are going to overtake Japan. And we are going to do what? We are going to overtake Japan. Clear? Now, when we are moving towards economic development comes at a cost. What is that cost? The cost is environment. So a lot of times economic growth or economic developmental projects are in contradiction to what? They are in contradiction to environment sustainability. है ना? So if you are making highways, expressways, to take up that, it is very likely that you have to cut down trees. If you have to achieve economic development, it requires that you exploit your natural resources. The natural resources that are present, those natural resources are to be exploited. And by exploitation, I mean they are to be used. And when you use those natural resources, again, there is an issue of environment sustainability that is there. Okay. So India is right now in this dilemma of whether we need to move ahead full-fledgedly just focusing on economics, and can we take that luxury of just diluting the importance of environment. So that is one thing that is of concern. Clear? Now, if India has to study, okay, what are the measures? If we know, yes, we need economic development, but we also need to sustain our environment. So in that case, if India starts looking at what can be the measures that are to be adopted, we can study different countries. There are a lot of countries who have achieved economic development, and they have they have not compromised a lot on environment. Like if we talk about a country like Bhutan, so Bhutan is a country which is performing very well. Very recently, it has been removed from the list of LDC, that is the least developed countries का जो list होता है, उसमें से भूटान को हटा दिया गया है. It's no more the least developed country. Now it is a part of developing country. है ना? It's a part of developing country. And the most important factor here is that Bhutan gives a lot of importance to its environment. So we can study Bhutan and understand the practices, the administrative practices and we can do what? We can use those practices even in India. है ना? That is one way. That is what comparative analysis is. Similarly, that is also the case for European countries. So a lot of European countries which have achieved economic development, they have achieved economic development but not at the cost of environment. So what they do is they maintain a balance. So in that case, again, India requires to study the model which has been which has been used by a lot of European countries, and accordingly इंडिया में अंडरटेक दोज डेवलपमेंटल एफर्ट्स. अब यहां पर इंपॉर्टेंस है क्योंकि what has to be understood is that when we are making that comparative analysis, we try to answer these three questions. What are those? What is to be adopted? That means when we study these two countries, or when we make comparative analysis, we do not just study the administration, because CPA does what? CPA does not consider administration to be working or functioning in a vacuum. Administration does not function in a vacuum. Administration has an ecology. Administration has what? Administration has an ecology in which it functions. है ना? The ecological approach. This is also called as the ecological approach. It functions in an ecology. Now, this ecology may involve the society. It may involve the political ecology. It may involve the economic ecology. It may also involve the technological ecology, and the ecological approach that is there. Ecological approach talks about this kind of a relationship. That means administration cannot be studied in a vacuum. It cannot be studied in a vacuum. Administration has to be studied by understanding that it is embedded in its ecology. It is embedded. वो अपनी इकोलॉजी का पार्ट है, और उसकी इकोलॉजी में सोसाइटी, पॉलिटिक्स, इकोनॉमिक्स, टेक्नोलॉजी और भी फैक्टर्स हो सकते हैं, बट दे आर वेरी मच अ पार्ट ऑफ इट्स इकोलॉजी. दे आर वेरी मच अ पार्ट ऑफ इट्स इकोलॉजी. क्लियर? Now try and understand, because when we are making this comparative analysis, now we have to understand what is to be adopted. That means when we study the administration, when we compare the administration of again, suppose let's take an example of India. So India has a society. India has a political and economic technological. This is India's administrative environment, and if we are comparing it to the ecology maybe of some other country, like let's take some European country, when we make this comparative analysis, what you have to understand is that the environment or the ecology that is there of administration of a European country is very different from the kind of administration that India has and the ecology that India has. है ना? तो इसमें क्या हो सकता है? Because there is a difference, there are only a few things which can be adopted. तो कुछ ऐसे फैक्टर्स हैं, कॉमन फैक्टर्स हैं जो अडॉप्ट किया जा सकता है. Some common factors that are there can be adopted. है ना? Some common factors can be adopted. Some maybe in Europe there are a few things which are being taken up. और उसे अडॉप्ट किया जा सकता है, ठीक है, लेकिन हर चीज नहीं. व्हाट कैन बी अडॉप्टेड, दैट मीन्स हर चीज ऑटोमेटिकली अडॉप्ट नहीं किया जा सकता है ना. हर चीज आप अडॉप्ट नहीं कर सकते हो, क्योंकि इकोलॉजी बहुत अलग है. इकोलॉजी ऑफ इंडिया and the administration embedded in it and the ecology of Europe and the administration embedded in it is very very different, है ना. तो हर चीज जो यूरोप में चल रहा है आप उस चीज को ऑटोमेटिकली अडॉप्ट नहीं कर सकते हो. कुछ ऐसी चीजें हैं जिसको अडॉप्ट किया जा सकता है, कुछ ऐसी चीजें हैं जिसको आप अडॉप्ट नहीं कर सकते हो, आपको वो चीजें रिजेक्ट करना पड़ेगा. और कुछ ऐसी चीजें हैं जिसको अडॉप्ट तो किया जा सकता है लेकिन विथ सम मॉडिफिकेशंस, नॉट इन द ओरिजिनल फॉर्म, नॉट इन द ओरिजिनल वे as it is in Europe, not in the original way as it is in Europe, है ना. Let's take an example. देखो, अगर हम यूरोप की बात करते हैं एंड वी कंपेयर द यूरोप्स कल्चर विद दैट ऑफ द इंडियन कल्चर, है ना. सो डू यू नो, कैन वी से दे आर सिमिलर? व्हाट डू यू थिंक? इज यूरोप्स कल्चर सिमिलर टू दैट ऑफ इंडिया? यस. इज द यूरोपियन कल्चर similar to that of India? Is the European culture similar to India? Yes or no? Is the European culture similar to India? Samir says no. What about others? Yes, others feels, the others you are feeling yes, there is a similarity, huh? Anup says no. Obviously it is not the case. देखो, इंडिया के कल्चर और यूरोप के कल्चर में बहुत फर्क है. इट्स नॉट जस्ट डिफरेंट, it is hugely different, है ना. it's not just different, it is hugely different, है ना. Similarly, if you look at the politics of Europe and the politics of India, the political environment that is there, do you find the political environment to be the same या difference है? आपको क्या लगता है? European countries, do they have the same kind of political environment as that of India? Yes or no? Yes or no? Does the political environment of India, is it similar to that of Europe? No. It is of course not similar. It is of course not similar, and there are a lot of differences, है ना. There are a lot of differences. Similarly is the case with economics and technology. So Indian society is different, Indian politics is different, Indian economics is different, Indian technology is different, and when there is so much difference between the two, so what you have to understand is that when we are studying and when we are comparing Indian administration to that of European administration, we cannot overlook these factors. हम इसे overlook नहीं कर सकते हैं. We cannot overlook these factors. These factors are very, very, very important and it cannot be overlooked. These factors cannot be overlooked. These factors cannot be overlooked. ठीक है, ये आपको जानना जरूरी है. इसी वजह से as I look at the question, what is to be adopted? So in despite this dissimilarities that we have talked about, इतने differences हैं, but फिर भी कुछ फैक्टर्स हैं जो हम यूरोप से बोरो कर सकते हैं, कुछ टेक्निक्स है जो हम यूरोप से बोरो कर सकते हैं, कुछ ऐसी चेंजेस है, पॉलिसीज है जो हम यूरोप से बोरो कर सकते हैं, है ना. सेकेंडली, what can be adopted, that means there are some things which can be adopted with modifications. Yani we cannot borrow it as it is and implement it in India. We can modify it. We can do what? We can modify it and then we can adopt it. Like, let's take an example. Do you know what is UBI? Anyone who knows this? UBI stands for Universal Basic Income. Universal Basic Income. Do you know what this is? Yes, tell me, yes or no. Do you know what is Universal Basic Income? Yes or no? Do you know what this is? Universal Basic Income? Universal Basic Income, yes or no? No. Anyone who knows about it? Anyone who has read about it? Anyone who knows about what Universal Basic Income is? चलो मैं बताता हूं. यूनिवर्सल बेसिक इनकम एक इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रैटेजी है, एक इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रैटेजी है which has been adopted by Europe, where even if an individual is unemployed, even if an individual is unemployed, the state provides some money, or every month they are provided with a certain sum of money to take care of their basic expenditures, है ना. जैसे जो ग्रोसरीज हैं, जो फूड होता है, उसके लिए कुछ एस्टिमेटेड एक्सपेंडिचर है. जो यूरोप में क्योंकि ठंड बहुत पड़ती है तो घर पे हीटिंग होना जरूरी है, तो उसके लिए कुछ मिनिमम पैसे जरूरी है. सो दे हैव कैलकुलेटेड कि एटलीस्ट इतने पैसे की जरूरत बेसिक सर्वाइवल के लिए जरूरी है. और जनरली हर यूरोपियन कंट्री क्या करता है, वो कोई भी ऐसा इंडिविजुअल जो अनएम्प्लॉयड है, उस इंडिविजुअल को उतना पैसा जरूर दिया जाता है हर महीने. एवरी मंथ दैट मिनिमम अमाउंट ऑफ मनी इज प्रोवाइडेड टू एवरी इंडिविजुअल इन यूरोप. मोस्ट ऑफ द यूरोपियन कंट्रीज हैव adopted it. ठीक है. बट इन इंडिया this is very difficult to adopt. In India, we cannot adopt this. First of all, the population of India is 140 crores. So in 140 crores, if we suppose, even if we take suppose a family of 5, है ना, एक ऐसा हम ये कर लेते हैं कि एक फैमिली में एक इंडिविजुअल को दिया जाएगा, है ना. तो अगर हम बाई 5 डिवाइड भी कर देते हैं, ठीक है, बाई 5 अगर हम 140 करोड़ को बाई 5 डिवाइड भी कर देते हैं, ठीक है, तो भी आप देखोगे कि करीब करीब 30 करोड़ फैमिलीज तो हैं. फिर भी इट विल बी मोर देन दैट, समवेयर अराउंड दैट, बट फिर भी मान लेते हैं कि 30 करोड़ फैमिलीज है. 30 करोड़ फैमिलीज आर देयर. ठीक है. अब 30 करोड़ फैमिलीज में से अगर मान लो आप कैलकुलेट करते हो कि खाने के लिए कितना पैसा चाहिए, ठीक है, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी बिल एंड ऑल ऑफ इट यू कैलकुलेट, ठीक है, आपने कैलकुलेट किया, तो समवेयर अराउंड अगर हम कुछ नहीं भी कहते हैं 10,000 रुपए की जरूरत पड़ेगी महीने. 10,000 rupees to 30 crore families per month. Look at the kind of expenditure that is there. Europe can afford it. Why? because there is a difference in the kind of no society that is there. That means if you look at the society, you will find that the society in Europe in terms of its population वो काफी कम है, काफी कम है. और इकोनॉमिकली अगर हम देखते हैं तो यूरोप में इकोनॉमिकली स्पीकिंग देयर आर कंसिडरेबल नंबर ऑफ पीपल हु आर इकोनॉमिकली क्वाइट स्किल्ड एंड दे आर वेल टू डू, है ना, वो नंबर ज्यादा है. दूसरी बात, अगर हम इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटीज की बात कर ले तो इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटीज ज्यादा है वहां पर. यानी ये यूनिवर्सल बेसिक इनकम कॉन्सेप्ट ये यूरोप में चल जाएगा, लेकिन ये इंडिया में नहीं चल सकता है. सो इट मे नॉट बी वेरी सक्सेसफुल इन इंडिया, विच मीन्स वी कैन नॉट एडॉप्ट इट. व्हाट वी नीड टू डू इज वी नीड टू रिजेक्ट इट, है ना. तो हमें ये बात समझनी चाहिए जब भी हम कंपैरेटिव एनालिसिस करते हैं ना, तो कंपैरेटिव एनालिसिस इज विद दिस ऑब्जेक्टिव. हमारा ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है? आवर ऑब्जेक्टिव इज दिस, टू अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट आर द थिंग्स दैट कैन बी एडॉप्टेड, what are the things which can be modified and then adopted, and then what are the things that need to be rejected. We have to understand this. This is the objective. This is the objective that we have. This is the objective. And accordingly, when we are making this analysis, we have to take into consideration the ecology. And that is what comparative public administration is. That is what comparative public administration is. जहां पर हम अपने एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव मैकेनिज्म को, अपने एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव स्ट्रक्चर को, अपने एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव प्रैक्टिसेस को हम कंपेयर करते हैं फ्रॉम दैट ऑफ अदर कंट्रीज. वी लुक एट व्हाट दे आर डूइंग, व्हाट वी आर डूइंग, व्हाट इंस्टीट्यूशंस दे हैव, व्हाट इंस्टीट्यूशंस वी हैव, what procedures they follow, what procedures we follow. We make a comparative analysis, and when we make a comparative analysis, then we also take into account the fact that there is something called as ecology, which means there is always a difference between the environment, or you can say the ecology of administration. So we are aware, when we are taking up this comparison, we are aware of this difference. We are aware of this difference that is there, and that difference is taken into consideration. Clear? And accordingly, finally, we understand this idea. That means, if suppose there is some lacunas, some problems in the way administration is functioning in India, in comparison to maybe some other countries. So we first understand that because there are ecological differences, so we have to be very careful in adopting only those practices which can be adopted in India, है ना, which can be adopted in India. Secondly, we have to understand कि what practices can be adopted but it would require modifications. And thirdly, we also have to understand what needs to be rejected, because not everything can be adopted because the ecology is different. This is what comparative public administration is. Clear? Yes or no? Now, there is a term that we have talked about, the term being context sensitivity. Context sensitivity. So in which context, in which background have we talked about context sensitivity? Can you tell me? In which background have we talked about context sensitivity? Who will tell me this? In which background have we talked about context sensitivity? In which background have we talked about context sensitivity? I will not accept no as an answer. Wilson's comparative analysis. Okay. Only in Wilson's theory, or have we also studied it somewhere else? Have we also studied it somewhere else? Yes, in Wilson's idea. Yes, absolutely correct, Pragya. Sharpening knife example we had taken. That was what Wilson had said. But along with this, along with context sensitivity, now in Wilson's theory, have we also studied it somewhere else? अरे हमने एक जगह नहीं पढ़ा है, हमने मल्टीपल जगह पढ़ा है इसे. Just try and remember. Yes, Wilson is obviously the most prominent example. Wilson ने कहा था कि हमें बोरो करते वक्त, जब भी हम कंपैरेटिव एनालिसिस कर रहे हैं, जब हम बोरो कर रहे हैं, तो हमें कॉन्टेक्स्ट सेंसिटिव होने की जरूरत है. इसके अलावा जब हम पब्लिक चॉइस अप्रोच डिस्कस कर रहे थे, जब हम एनपीएम डिस्कस कर रहे थे, ठीक है, पब्लिक चॉइस अप्रोच, एनपीएम, गुड गवर्नेंस, जब हम इन आइडियाज को डिस्कस कर रहे थे, तो वहां पर हमने क्रिटिसिज्म्स में कॉन्टेक्स्ट सेंसिटिविटी की बात की थी कि किस तरह से अगर हम पब्लिक चॉइस अप्रोच की बात करें, which talks about institutional pluralism, it is not something which will be applicable everywhere in the same manner. It will not be applicable everywhere in the same manner. ये नहीं होगा. Even in good governance we had made that criticism. Even in NPM we had made that very criticism. और ये context sensitivity ही तो है. This is what it is. Where you understand that the ecology of one region or one country may be very different from the ecology of the other country. It will be very different from the ecology of the other country. है ना? It would be very different from the ecology of the other country. And that is what context sensitivity is. And that is what we mean when we say we should understand what is to be adopted. यानी what can be borrowed as it is. जो यहां चल रहा है उसी को यहां बोरो कर लिया. ये हर चीज में नहीं हो सकता. In some cases it can be. In some cases there may require some kind of modification. कुछ modifications की जरूरत पड़ सकती है. And thirdly, in some cases it would be what? It would be completely rejected. कुछ ऐसी चीजें हैं जो हम adopt ही नहीं कर सकते. उसका भी example मैंने आपको दिया है. The universal basic income concept. Is this clear? Comparative public administration, is the very idea clear?